There is a scene in Gone with the Wind, not one of the better known ones, not the frankly Scarlet, I don't give a damn scene, but there's a scene in Gone with the Wind when the war is over, Red is gone, Scarlet comes back into the plantation house at Tara, and her Irish father is clearly deranged, sitting at the table counting Confederate dollars. It's obvious that Gerald O'Hara has gone insane because he is focused on what is now completely worthless Confederate money, as if the currency of the fallen South was somehow going to save him. And that image came to mind for me today because in a very real way, Gerald O'Hara is a symbol for corporate America. As the Buddhist philosopher Alan Watts has famously put it, money does not exist. It's nonsense to talk about not having enough money for education, health care, housing, the infrastructure, because money is only a concept. It's a measuring tool. You would never hear a carpenter say that they're not going to finish building a house because they have run out of inches. Money is only how we measure value. It's the way that we have agreed to exchange the things that really are valuable. Money has no inherent worth. But what does have inherent worth? Things that are of limited supply. Food has inherent worth. Land has value. They're not making any more of it. Clean water, clean air have value because we have to have them to live. Our lives have value because we are mortal. We may extend our lives, but we know that there's always a limit to that. Money doesn't really exist. Forests exist. Fish in the ocean exist. You and I, we exist, and we have value. That's what I loved about David Suzuki's video clip that we used as our wisdom lesson today, because economics, for all of its pretense, is not a science. It's really more of an aspect of sociology. But we tend to treat economics as if it were on a par with chemistry or hard math. It isn't. Bill Clinton defeated George H.W. Bush in 1992, largely saying, "It's the economy, stupid." And that resonated with people because what he meant was not really the economy. What he really meant was unemployment. He meant it was poverty. He meant it was homelessness. It was trying to live without health insurance or without a retirement program. And for a lot of us, it was fear. Fear that we would grow old and sick without the resources to take care of ourselves. Fear that we might not be able to provide for our kids if something just went a little bit wrong, if we were unemployed for weeks or months, that we might not be able to keep a house, we might not be able to keep our kids housed and clothed and fed. It was fear that we wouldn't be able to provide an education for them, or that they would end up stuck in some crummy job that they hated, but we couldn't do anything to find more satisfaction in their lives. Clinton could say that it was the economy, but the fact is that the real issue is that economic reasoning has created fear in our society. The people who control the economy, the captains of industry, the banking system, Wall Street, they keep rigging the system so that people who don't actually produce wealth are taking a larger and larger share of the wealth to themselves. Natural resources is where the real wealth is. But natural resources are limited. They're especially limited if you talk about them in a renewable way. But as Gandhi said, there is more than enough for the world's needs. There's not enough for the world's greed. There is, my friends, There is no morally defensible reason for there to be a single homeless person in the United States of America. We have more empty houses that have been foreclosed on by banks than we have homeless people in this country. We throw away every day 10 times as much food as it would take to resolve all of the hunger issues in America. If only we had a more just, a more humane, a more logical, a more sensible way of distributing goods rather than this fake currency economic system, everyone who wanted a college education could have one. And laborers would not have to work 7 days a week or work 2 jobs or 3 jobs. Human beings in the industrial age, in this modern era, shouldn't have to work more than 30 or 32 hours a week, and everyone should get a month or 6 weeks of paid vacation every year. What's more, if we had a more equitable means of distributing resources, we would have more actors. We would have more poets, more musicians, more artists, more architects. People are trapped, and there's potential research scientists and inventors who are trapped doing a horrible, crummy job because they are afraid of the economy. They are afraid to actually use their talents to become more in life because we have trapped them in a cycle of barely existing poverty. Our society is technologically, scientifically, and intellectually capable of being so much better. Our world could be so much better with the resources that we have in hand. But our government, our systems of employment, even the delivery of our health care and education systems are run by economics rather than ethics. We think about balance sheets before we think about people. Things like clean water and air, a safe food supply, or even a life that is lived as a musician or an artist is what an economist will call an externality. For an economist, the value of a great work of art is what it would bring at auction. But if you walk through the Nelson Adkins Art Museum in Kansas City and you stand in front of that huge canvas of Monet's water lilies, is the first thing that comes to your mind what that painting is worth? I mean, is that really how we judge art? If you've had the good fortune, as I have, to walk through the British Museum, to walk among the Elgin marbles from the Greek Parthenon, or to stand in front of the Rosetta Stone, is the value of these things what they would bring at auction? Or isn't there some other way to talk about what has value in life? In economics, a forest only has value after it has been cut down and turned into lumber and sold. For an economist, the value of a cold mountain stream is zero unless it can be bottled and sold in a grocery store. Men and women, at best, our economy is only one concern among many, and it is much less of a concern than the health of our ecology and the happiness of our children and our grandchildren. Surely this is obvious to us, right? I mean, I'm not saying anything that you don't already know. And yet, our government does not appear to be aware of this. And this is a Republican and a Democratic problem because truly, both of our political parties are fundamentally corporatist parties. One may be more acceptable to us than the other, but viewed at a distance, they look an awful lot alike, and they look like corporations. We are now very engaged in raising support for the Native Americans who are rallying around the Sioux tribe at Standing Rock, North Dakota. The Indians and others who have gathered there in peaceful protest choose to call themselves water protectors because they're not there to riot. They're not leading a protest. They're really just trying to be good stewards of the earth. They're trying to protect the Missouri River from the prospect of being polluted by crude oil. It's not a hypothetical issue. Just since 2010, just over the last 5 or 6 years, there have been over 3,000 pipeline eruptions or leaks in the United States. More than 1,000 of those were crude oil. There has been more than 80 people who've been killed in pipeline accidents. Over 1 million gallons of crude oil has been spilled on the ground and in the water systems. And in fact, the largest spill, 800,000 gallons of crude oil, was spilled in North Dakota in 2013. You wonder why the sewer are not buying into the notion that these pipelines are safe. A pipeline in North Dakota was struck by lightning. It exploded and dumped 800,000 gallons of crude oil on the ground before they could get it stopped. Just last month, there was a gasoline pipeline that had aged in Alabama, and it blew up in Helena. And some friends of mine in the area called because they know that my brother lives in Helena, Alabama. So I called him immediately, and he and his family were fine. Their house was fine, but they were very close to where the explosion had happened. The explosion had killed someone, had sent more than 80 people to the hospital, and my brother's response was that he was afraid their gas prices were going to go up. That's how economics teaches us to view our lives. I hung up the phone. I could hardly believe that my ordained Methodist pastor brother was talking about the explosion in terms of gasoline prices and not in the death of one of his neighbors and injuries to dozens and dozens of people. But then, after I found out that he voted for Trump, I'm not looking for a lot of logical conversation out of John right now. But truly, how hard does your heart have to be to think about gasoline prices first after an explosion like that? But then I turned on NPR, which I do every day, and you should too. Good, reliable, liberal, national public radio. They mentioned the explosion, and the first thing they said was locals fear that their gasoline prices will go up. How did this happen to, where did our humanity go? This is no accident. This is a lifetime of training to think about everything in terms of dollars and cents. As I've been reading about Native American cultures, that the cultures that our European and African ancestors first encountered on this continent, one of the stark differences between our cultures, one that shows up in differences of languages, was that in most Native American languages, they didn't even have a word for work. They didn't have jobs. They didn't have careers. They didn't leave their children behind to go to the office. They did what they did to survive together. They lived and acted as families. The language, the logic of economics has so seeped into our skulls that we literally raise our children with the stated or unstated presumption that the purpose of living is to get a job so you can pay your bills. People, do you know that you are more than a job and that paying your bills is not the only goal to living? Native Americans helped each other build their shelters. They hunted, they fished, they farmed, but they didn't have a word for work or job or career or even retirement because they did these things collectively for their own existence. And not many of us, I'm guessing, would embrace a return to a Stone Age standard of living, but our choice in this country in the 21st century is not one of either living with constant anxiety of not being able to pay your bills or going out and trying to live off the land. Now, you've heard me say before that I believe that the Dakota Access Pipeline project will be eventually finished in some way. I hope there are some crucial changes, but it's a $3.8 billion project, and $3 billion of that has already been spent. It's 1,100 miles of pipeline, and more than 1,000 miles of it have been built. So I think it's going to be finished. But that is because we think in economic terms. What is the value of the Missouri River without crude oil in it? What is the value of that? What is the value of a river that meets the Mississippi at St. Louis and then travels down to Cairo where it meets the Ohio and flows past Memphis all the way down to New Orleans? What is the value of a water system that provides drinking water to millions of Americans and waters the farmlands that feeds half of this nation? I'm just saying, it's the water, stupid. It's the air, it's the land, it's the food, it's the breath, it's the drink, it's life itself. If we are not all protectors of the land, the air, and the water, then we're just like some crazy old man sitting in an old plantation house counting worthless cash while the world falls apart all around us.
Thank you for watching our videos. We are entirely dependent on the donations of our listeners and members. We hope that you find this content to be important enough to help us to keep offering these videos to the public at no charge by becoming a regular contributor. Please click on the donate button on our website at www.spfccc.org. Thank you for your support of progressive religious programming.